Marina had been staring at the same coordinate on her navigation screen for the past 17 minutes. The research station that the infected colonists were heading toward sat on a moon orbiting Zephyr 7's largest gas giant. It was a station designed for atmospheric sampling and deep space observation, not equipped to handle what was coming. She knew that if the infection spread to the research station, the Elven Council would have no choice but to authorize a complete planetary sterilization. Everyone there would die, humans and transformed alike. Copper pressed his large head against her shoulder as she sat in the pilot's seat. The dragon seemed to sense her internal conflict. His scales had returned to their normal burnished copper color, but his eyes still held that alert intensity from the battle. Jade was asleep in the cargo hold, recovering from her aerial combat with the transformed humans. The smaller dragon had taken a wound across her right flank, but it was already beginning to heal thanks to her accelerated biology. Marina's fingers drummed against the armrest as she considered her options. Option 1 was to follow protocol. She would send a full report to the Elven Council detailing everything she had discovered. They would immediately contact the human government, and within hours a quarantine fleet would be dispatched. The infected colonists would be intercepted before they reached the research station. The colony on Zephyr 7 would be sterilized. It was the safe choice. It was the logical choice. It was also the choice that haunted her, because she could not stop seeing Claire's eyes in that final moment before the explosion. Option 2 was much more dangerous. She could intercept the infected colonists herself before they reached the station. She could attempt to learn more about what this organism actually was and what it wanted. She could try to understand if the transformation was truly a disease or something else entirely. But this option came with risks that made even thinking about it feel reckless. If she was wrong, if the organism was truly dangerous, then she would be allowing it to spread. The blood of millions would be on her hands. Marina stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the darkness of space. The twin suns of Zephyr 7 were small now, falling away as her ship climbed out of the planet's gravity well. She thought about her family back on the Elven homeworld. She thought about the war that had taken so many of her people, and how fear had driven elves to make terrible decisions. Fear had caused them to destroy entire civilizations that might have been allies. Fear had nearly destroyed her own world. The thing that nobody ever told you about, being an emissary for the Elven Council, was that you spent most of your time questioning whether the Council's decisions were actually wise. Marina had seen enough of the galaxy to know that the elves were not the superior species they believed themselves to be. The universe was full of strange and wonderful things, and the elves seemed determined to destroy anything they did not immediately understand. A soft chime alerted her to an incoming signal. Marina rushed back to the communications console and discovered that it was a distress beacon, but not from any human ship she recognized. It was an older design, at least 50 years outdated, with a frequency that made her entire body go cold. It was Elven. Her fingers moved across the console, triangulating the signal's source. The beacon was coming from a small asteroid in the nearby system, only 2 hours away if she increased her speed. Marina had never heard of any Elven presence this far from home. The Elven Council kept meticulous records of every outpost, every ship, every colony. An unregistered beacon could only mean one thing. This was something the Council did not want known. Copper lifted his head and released a low sound, almost a question. Marina reached back and scratched behind his jaw where he loved to be touched. The dragon had become so attuned to her emotions that he sometimes seemed to sense her thoughts before she fully formed them herself. "I know, old friend," she whispered. "This changes everything." Marina made her decision. She would intercept the distress beacon first. If there were other elves out here, they might have information about what she had discovered on Zephyr 7. They might know something about the organism, or why the Council had never mentioned this outpost. She altered her course toward the asteroid, watching as the distant speck grew larger on her sensors. The asteroid was smaller than she had expected, barely 5 kilometers across, covered in ancient impact craters and dust. As she approached, the distress beacon grew stronger, but strangely, there were no other signals. No power readings, no thermal signatures. It was as if the beacon was broadcasting into an empty void. Marina took a deep breath and initiated the landing sequence. Copper moved to stand near the airlock, his posture alert and protective. She had learned long ago that dragons had an instinct for danger that sometimes surpassed technology and instruments. If Copper was worried, she needed to be worried. The landing was smooth, the asteroid's weak gravity making the ship settle gently onto the surface. Marina suited up carefully, checking her weapons and her environmental systems twice. She powered up her hand scanner, a small device that would alert her to any energy signatures or unusual readings within 100 meters. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped out onto the ancient rock. The surface was barren and lifeless, covered in a fine gray dust that clung to her suit. The distress beacon appeared to be coming from somewhere inside a large crater formation, about half a kilometer away. Marina began walking, her boots leaving small prints in the dust that would likely remain there for thousands of years. As she walked, she noticed something odd. The dust was not distributed evenly. There were paths through it, roads almost, worn smooth by repeated walking. Something had been moving across this asteroid for a very long time. Marina increased her pace, her hand moving instinctively to the plasma pistol at her hip. The entrance to what appeared to be a cave system opened before her. The distress beacon was definitely coming from inside. Marina switched on her suit lights and descended into the darkness. The walls of the cave were smooth in places, rough in others. Some areas appeared to have been carved or shaped deliberately. This was not a natural cavern. Someone had built this. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Marina began to see symbols on the walls. They were Old Elven script, but not the modern version. This was ancient, from before the schism. From the time when elves had first started exploring the galaxy thousands of years ago. She recognized some of the words. Sanctuary, refuge, forgotten, lost. The beacon led her deeper into the cavern system until she emerged into a large chamber. What she saw there made her stop in her tracks. It was a city, carved directly into the asteroid's core. Buildings were shaped from the rock itself, glowing softly with bioluminescent plants that still somehow survived in this place. The architecture was elven, but different from anything she had ever seen. It was older, more elegant, infused with a kind of magic that had long since faded from the modern elven world. But the city was abandoned. Completely empty. There were no people, no signs of life. Yet everything was remarkably preserved, as if the inhabitants had simply vanished one day and never returned. Marina walked through streets made of polished stone, past shops and libraries and what appeared to be residential structures. Everything told a story of a civilization that had once thrived here. The distress beacon was coming from a building at the city center, a structure that looked like it might have been a government building or temple. Marina approached cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The main doors were open, hanging slightly ajar as if waiting for someone to enter. Inside, Marina found the source of the distress beacon. It was a small device, no larger than her fist, sitting on a pedestal in what appeared to be a ritual chamber. Around it were symbols written on the floor in a substance that might have once been blood. The symbols were different from the ones outside. They were warnings. They were pleas. Marina carefully approached the beacon and examined it. It was still broadcasting, its power source somehow still active after what must have been centuries. She pressed a small panel on its side, and suddenly a holographic image flickered to life. It was an elven man, ancient and weary, his eyes filled with a profound sadness that transcended time itself. The hologram began to speak, and Marina listened as the voice filled the chamber with words that would change everything she thought she knew about her people and their history. The message was a confession, a warning, and a revelation all at once. And when it was finished, Marina understood why this place had been hidden, why the Council had never mentioned it, and why the discovery of the transformed humans on Zephyr 7 was not an accident. She understood that the organism that had infected the human colonists was not something new. It was something old. It was something that the elves had encountered before, something that the ancient elves had tried to contain, and something that the modern council had hoped would remain forgotten forever. But Marina also understood that the ancient elves who built this city had a very different view of the organism than her current leaders did. They had not considered it a plague. They had considered it a gift. The holographic message continued, and Marina stood frozen as the ancient elf's voice echoed through the abandoned temple. The figure explained how thousands of years ago the elves had discovered an organism on a distant world. It was a symbiotic being, neither truly alive nor dead in the conventional sense. It existed in a state between matter and energy, capable of bonding with biological hosts and enhancing their abilities in extraordinary ways. The ancient elves had called it the gift of evolution. The early explorers who had been infected with the organism reported sensations of profound clarity and power. They could perceive reality in ways that uninfected elves could not. They could access regions of their mind that had previously been dormant. They lived longer, healed faster, and possessed an intelligence that seemed to grow exponentially with each passing year. For a brief moment in elven history, the organism had been embraced. The infected elves were celebrated as the next stage of evolution. But then something changed. The infected elves began to form a collective consciousness, a shared network of thoughts and experiences that transcended individual identity. They were still individuals according to the hologram, but they perceived themselves as part of something greater. And when the uninfected elves realized that the infected ones could no longer be convinced to rejoin society, as it had previously existed, fear took hold. A faction of elves, arguing that the infection was a threat to elven purity and independence, pushed for a cure. But before a cure could be developed, war broke out. The infected elves did not fight back violently according to the message. They simply walked away, taking their ships and leaving for the outer reaches of space. The uninfected elves pursued them, drove them further and further away until finally, the infected elves disappeared from the known galaxy. The Council had tried to erase the history of this event. They had destroyed records and killed researchers who wanted to study what had happened. They had created official narratives about how the ancient elves had simply dispersed across the galaxy, but the truth was that they had been expelled. The elves of Marina's time descended from the ones who had chosen purity over evolution, fear over transformation. The hologram showed the face of an infected elf, a woman with eyes that burned with an inner light. She was beautiful and terrible at the same time, and when she spoke, her voice had a musical quality to it, as if she were singing rather than speaking. She said that they did not blame the uninfected elves for their fear. Evolution had always been a process that inspired terror in those who came before, but they hoped that one day, the elves would understand that the choice to accept or reject the organism should belong to the individual, not the collective. The hologram faded and Marina was left standing in silence. Her mind reeled with the implications. The organism on Zephyr 7 was not an invasive species or an accident of nature. It was the work of the ancient infected elves, preserved and hidden, waiting for someone curious enough to find it again. Marina left the temple and began to explore the abandoned city more thoroughly. In what appeared to be a library, she found records stored on crystalline tablets, a technology that the modern elves had abandoned millennia ago. She used her suit's translation matrix to read through the documents, and each one reinforced what the hologram had told her. There were records of other colonies. The infected elves had traveled far beyond the space that the modern council controlled. They had left caches of the organism on multiple worlds, hidden in places where it might eventually be discovered by other species who might be curious enough to accept transformation. It was not an attempt at conquest or invasion. It was an offer, a gift left for whoever might want it. One particular document caught her attention. It detailed a plan created thousands of years ago to place the organism on a human colony world. The document explained that humans were remarkably adaptable creatures, with a capacity for growth and change that rivaled that of elves. The infected elves believed that humans might embrace transformation in ways that other species could not. The plan had been refined over centuries, with the organism being placed on multiple human worlds, each time hidden in locations where humans would eventually find it. The infection on Zephyr 7 was not a surprise. It was the culmination of a plan that had been in motion since before Marina was even born. Marina sat down on the edge of a crystalline platform and tried to process everything she had learned. Her entire understanding of history had just been rewritten. Her entire understanding of her own people had been challenged. The Elven Council had built itself on a lie. They had expelled half their population, erased the history of that expulsion, and then spent thousands of years ensuring that no other species would be allowed to make the same choice that the infected elves had made. The ethical implications were staggering. If she reported what she had found to the Council, they would destroy all of this. They would sterilize Zephyr 7 and launch an investigation that would eventually uncover all the other hidden caches of the organism. They would hunt down any descendants of the infected elves who still lived in the outer reaches of space. And they would ensure that no other species ever had the opportunity to choose transformation for themselves. But if she did not report what she had found, she would be betraying her duty as an emissary. She would be allowing a potential threat to spread unchecked. She would be making a choice that could affect billions of lives based on ancient history and a single preserved message. Marina stood and walked back toward the entrance of the city. As she walked through the streets, she began to notice something she had missed before. There were more recent signs of habitation. Dust had been disturbed in the last few years. Some of the bioluminescent plants had been tended and trimmed. Someone had been here. Someone was still visiting this place, maintaining it, keeping it alive. She increased her pace, moving back toward her ship. If there were still infected elves, if they were still tending to these hidden caches, then they would want to know that the organism had been discovered on Zephyr 7. They would want to know that a human was being infected right now, and they would want to know that an elven emissary had found this place. As Marina climbed back toward the cave entrance, she heard a sound that made her stop. It was not a sound exactly. It was more like a vibration in the air, a frequency that seemed to bypass her ears and communicate directly with her mind. It felt like a voice, but not in any language she knew. It felt like an invitation. When she reached the surface of the asteroid, she found that her ship was no longer alone. Another vessel had landed nearby, a sleek elven design that she did not recognize. It was old technology, at least 1,000 years old, but it was still operational. And standing near it, waiting for her, was a figure in a suit that marked them as someone who did not belong to any modern elven faction. The figure's suit was made of a material that seemed to shift colors as it moved, reflecting the light of the distant stars. When Marina moved closer, the figure removed their helmet, revealing a face that looked both ancient and ageless. It was a woman, with eyes that held that same inner light that Marina had seen in the hologram. "Greetings, sister," the woman said, her voice carrying that same musical quality. "We have been waiting a very long time for someone like you to find this place. The question is, are you ready to know the truth about who we really are?" Marina found herself unable to speak. She wanted to draw her weapon, to retreat to her ship, to flee this situation entirely, but something held her in place. Something in that woman's eyes seemed to recognize Marina in a way that no one else ever had. She felt the familiar weight of copper pressing against her from behind through her suit, felt the dragon's protective presence. She thought of Jade sleeping in the cargo hold, of Claire's eyes in the final moment before the explosion, of all the unanswered questions that had been haunting her since she landed on Zephyr 7. "I am ready to listen," Marina heard herself say. The infected elf woman introduced herself as Lyra, though Marina suspected that was not her original name. It was the name she had chosen to use when dealing with uninfected elves, Lyra explained. The woman led Marina back into her ship, which was far more spacious than its exterior suggested. The interior was lined with crystalline displays showing data and images from across multiple star systems. It was a mobile research laboratory and command center combined into one vessel. Lyra began to explain the true scope of what the infected elves had been doing for the past thousands of years. They had not been hiding or fleeing from the uninfected elves. They had been conducting a grand experiment, seeding worlds with the organism, monitoring the development of various species, and carefully preparing for the day when other civilizations would be ready to make the choice to transform themselves. The organism itself was not truly parasitic in the negative sense. It was mutualistic. The host gained abilities and longevity. The organism gained the experience of living through different species, different cultures, different ways of being. It was a symbiosis that benefited both the host and the symbiote. The key was that the transformation had to be voluntary. The organism could not force itself onto an unwilling host. That was a fundamental rule that the infected elves had created thousands of years ago. Marina listened as Lyra described the various species who had already accepted transformation. There were beings from 3 different star systems who now lived in harmony with the organism. There were humans from older colonies who had chosen transformation, and who now lived in communities with infected elves and infected members of several other species. They had built a small civilization on the far side of the galactic core, far enough away that the Elven Council could never find them. The humans on Zephyr 7 were not the first humans to encounter the organism. But they would be the first humans to transform under the Council's direct observation. And that created a problem. The council would find out. They would react with violence and fear as they always did. And the humans on Zephyr 7 would either be destroyed before they could escape, or they would have to be rescued by the infected elves, which would trigger a conflict that the galaxy was not ready for. Marina asked Lyra a direct question. What was it that Lyra wanted from her? Why had she been led to this asteroid? Why had she been shown the history and the truth? Lyra smiled, and the expression was both beautiful and heartbreaking. She said that Marina was special. The dragons had marked her as someone who could bridge the gap between the infected and uninfected elves. The dragons were an ancient species older than elves, and they had their own connection to the organism. Copper and Jade had chosen Marina because they believed she had the capacity to understand transformation without the fear that paralyzed most elves. Lyra explained that the dragons had not always been separate from the organism. In fact, the oldest infected beings in the galaxy were dragons who had bonded with the organism millions of years ago. They had guided the infected elves in their earliest explorations, had helped them understand how to preserve the organism and spread it carefully. When humans had first built their spacefaring civilization, it was dragons who had suggested that humans might be worthy of the choice. Marina felt something shift in her understanding of Copper and Jade. The dragons had been guiding her all along. They had chosen to bond with her not by chance, but by careful selection. They had led her to Zephyr 7, allowed her to witness the transformation, and somehow arranged for her to discover the distress beacon. Every step of her journey had been orchestrated by beings far more ancient and wise than she had ever imagined. The question remained, what would Marina do with this knowledge? Lyra did not demand that she join the infected elves. She did not demand that she accept transformation herself. Instead, Lyra offered her a choice. Marina could return to the Elven Council with her report, intact and unedited. She could tell them everything that had happened on Zephyr 7 and allow them to respond as they always responded to threats. Or she could help the infected elves rescue the humans from Zephyr 7 before the Council even knew what had happened. She could buy time, buy space, and buy the humans the opportunity to choose their own evolution without fear of eradication. Marina asked what would happen to her if she made the second choice. Would she be forced to transform? Would she be able to return to the Council afterward? Lyra said that transformation could never be forced. That was absolute. But if Marina chose to help the infected elves, it was very unlikely that she would be able to return to the Council. She would be labeled as a traitor. She would be hunted. Her dragons would be taken from her and experimented upon. Her name would be erased from Elven history, just as the names of the infected elves had been erased thousands of years ago. Yet at the same time, if she helped the infected elves, she would be part of something greater. She would be part of a movement toward understanding, toward evolution, toward a future where different species could choose to enhance themselves without fear of annihilation. She would have the opportunity to do what the Council had never allowed her to do. Ask questions and find her own answers. Marina looked out the viewport of Lyra's ship at the asteroid below and the distant stars beyond. She thought about her family back on the Elven homeworld. She thought about Copper and Jade, who had never given her a reason to doubt them. She thought about Claire's face in that final moment, and she thought about all the humans on Zephyr 7 who were even now making the choice to transform, to become something more than they had been. She thought about what it meant to be loyal to a cause versus being loyal to what was right. The Elven Council had taught her that duty and hierarchy were the highest values, but the dragons had taught her something different. They had taught her that loyalty could be a bond that transcended species and history, that real loyalty came from the heart and not from uniform or position. Marina made her decision. She would help the infected elves rescue the humans. She would do everything in her power to ensure that the humans on Zephyr 7 had the opportunity to choose their own destiny. And when the Council came looking for her, she would be ready to face the consequences. She turned to Lyra and said, "Tell me what I need to do. I have 2 dragons, weapons, and access to several Council databases. If we are going to do this, we need to do it carefully and quickly. We need to get the humans off planet before the Council's quarantine fleet arrives." Lyra's eyes brightened with that inner light. She reached forward and took Marina's hand. And for just a moment, Marina could almost feel the consciousness of the organism beneath Lyra's skin. It was not alien or hostile. It was curious and hopeful and ancient beyond measure. "Welcome to the real future," Lyra said softly. The one that the Council has been trying to prevent for thousands of years. The plan that Lyra presented to Marina was both elegant and terrifying. They would need to work in stages, each one more dangerous than the last. First, they had to intercept the shuttle that the transformed humans had taken from the colony. The shuttle was currently in transit to the research station, but it was not moving at maximum speed. According to Lyra's sensors, the infected humans were being cautious, perhaps uncertain about how the uninfected humans on the research station would react to their transformation. Lyra's ship had a cloaking capability that was far beyond anything in the modern Elven fleet. It could approach the shuttle without being detected, and with Marina's help, they could dock with it and establish communication before the Council's scanners even registered that another ship was in the system. Once they had secured the shuttle, the next phase would be more complicated. They would have to disable the colony's communication systems temporarily, preventing any distress calls from being sent to the Council. This was the part that made Marina most uncomfortable, because it meant directly interfering with human government operations. But Lyra assured her that the humans on the research station were already compromised. Some of them had been in contact with the infected humans for longer than anyone realized. They would be receptive to the truth. The final phase was escape. All of the transformed humans, along with Marina and her dragons, would board Lyra's ship. They would accelerate to jump distance and leave the system before the Council's quarantine fleet could even detect their presence. The journey to the far side of the galactic core would take months, but they would have supplies and technology that would sustain them during the voyage. Marina asked what would happen to the uninfected humans at the research station. Lyra said that they would be given the same choice: transform or remain behind. If they chose to remain behind, they would retain their memory of meeting the infected humans, but their memories of this encounter could be gently edited using neural technology. They would remember only that the colony had experienced a strange phenomenon, but nothing specific enough to guide the Council's investigation. It was not mind control, Lyra insisted. It was simply allowing humans to be unconscious of knowledge they had not asked for. The difference was important and came down to one fundamental principle: no one would be harmed against their will, and no one would be prevented from making their own choice about transformation. Marina prepared herself mentally for what was to come. She went back to her ship and found Copper awake as if he had been waiting for her. She sat beside him and told the dragon everything that had happened, knowing that somehow he would understand. As she spoke, she felt the truth of what Lyra had said about the dragons. They had been guiding her all along. Copper's eyes seemed to hold an ancient wisdom, as if he had lived 1,000 lifetimes and was watching her take the first step of her own true journey. Jade emerged from the cargo hold, fully healed from her wound. The smaller dragon approached Marina and placed her head on Marina's lap, and Marina realized that both dragons had always known what she would choose. They had bonded with her not as her servants but as her guides, prepared to help her when she was finally ready to see beyond the lies of her people. Marina transferred supplies from her ship to Lyra's vessel. The Federation identification codes and authorization credentials that she had accumulated during her years as an emissary would be useful for a while, but eventually they would be revoked. She made sure to download every piece of information she could from her ship's database into portable storage crystals. If she was going to be labeled a traitor, she was going to do it with as much useful knowledge as possible. The departure from Marina's ship was bittersweet. She had spent 3 years on that vessel, traveling between star systems representing the Elven Council's interests. She had built a life around duty and protocol. She had convinced herself that following orders and maintaining the hierarchy was the path to fulfillment. Walking away from it felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss. But as she boarded Lyra's ship with her dragons, as the airlock sealed behind her, and Lyra's vessel began to accelerate toward the approaching shuttle, Marina felt something she had never experienced before. She felt free. The interception went exactly as planned. Lyra's cloaking technology was flawless, and within minutes their ship had docked with the human shuttle. Marina expected resistance, expected to be met with weapons and fear. Instead, she found a group of transformed humans who were almost expecting her arrival. The human who had once been Claire was among them. She looked completely different now. Her skin had taken on a quality that seemed almost crystalline, and her eyes held that same inner light that Marina had seen in Lyra. But when she spoke, her voice was still recognizable, still familiar, still unmistakably Claire. Claire explained that the organism operated on a level that transcended normal biological communication. The moment Marina had made her decision to help the infected elves, the transformed humans on the shuttle, had felt her commitment through the collective consciousness that connected all infected beings. They knew her intent before she even said a word. They knew that she had seen the hidden city, that she had chosen to trust Lyra, and that she was willing to face any consequence to give them the chance to choose their own future. One of the other transformed humans, a man who had been the colony's chief engineer, approached Marina and extended his hand in greeting. He said that they were grateful for her sacrifice, but they wanted her to understand that she was not sacrificing herself for them. She was choosing a new path, and that choice would benefit everyone involved. The organism did not demand gratitude. It welcomed partnership and mutual benefit. As the shuttle docked with Lyra's ship and the transformed humans began to transfer over, Marina received an alert on her portable communication unit. It was a message from the Elven Council. They had received a corrupted data transmission from her original report on Zephyr 7. The corruption meant that they could not understand what had happened at the colony, but they were dispatching a full investigative team to assess the situation. They would arrive at Zephyr 7 in approximately 4 hours. Marina showed the message to Lyra, who nodded as if she had been expecting exactly this. Lyra said that they had less time than she had hoped. They needed to leave for the research station immediately, rescue any humans who wanted to be rescued, and then jump to light speed before the Council ships could detect them. Marina felt her heart begin to race. This was the moment where she crossed a line from which there would be no return. This was the moment where she stopped being an emissary of the Elven Council and became something else entirely, something that the Council would hunt across the galaxy, something that would be remembered as a traitor to her own people. She looked at Copper, saw the dragon's expression of complete trust and readiness. She looked at Jade, saw the confidence in her smaller companion's stance. And she looked at Claire, who nodded with the wisdom of someone who had already made the choice to transform, who had already accepted a new identity and a new way of being. "Let's go," Marina said. "Let's get the humans off planet and show the Elven Council that the future they tried to prevent is already here." Lyra's ship accelerated toward Zephyr 7, her cloaking systems engaged, her weapons primed, and her course set toward a future that no one could have predicted. The research station was exactly as Marina had imagined it, a functional facility designed for pure scientific observation without aesthetic consideration. Metal corridors, flickering lighting systems, and the faint hum of machinery that never slept. But it was also different from what she expected, because it was not full of fear and confusion. Instead, the humans she encountered seemed almost to have been waiting for Lyra's arrival. Marina quickly realized that some of the human scientists at the research station had been infected longer than anyone had known. At some point in the distant past, infected elves had visited this facility, had left specimens of the organism hidden in the research labs, and had established a network of willing collaborators who understood what was eventually going to happen on Zephyr 7. One of the researchers, a man named Robert who had been studying atmospheric phenomena for 15 years, explained that he had been infected for 8 years. He had kept his infection secret, had gradually prepared his colleagues for the possibility of encountering the organism, and had ensured that the facility would be receptive to the transformed humans when they arrived from the colony. Not all of the research station's personnel were willing to leave, but most were. Some scientists were infected and eager to join the exodus. Others were uninfected but willing to accept the neural editing that would erase their conscious memory of events while leaving their subconscious understanding intact. A few refused both options, demanded to be left alone, and insisted that they would report everything to the Council. Lyra and Marina let them go. There was no attempt to stop them or force them into compliance. The infected elves had learned over thousands of years that coercion only created resentment and future problems. If someone wanted to reject transformation and wanted to report the incident to the Council, that was their choice to make. The organism could never spread through force. It could only spread through understanding and genuine acceptance. The process of integrating the rescued humans with the transformed ones and the infected elves was surprisingly smooth. Claire took it upon herself to help the new arrivals understand what was happening to them as they transitioned into the ship and began to interact with the collective consciousness that connected all infected beings. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had already gone through the transformation and had come out the other side stronger and more complete. Marina worked with Lyra to coordinate the ship's systems and prepare for the journey. The cloaking systems remained active, rendering the ship invisible to conventional scanners. But they could not remain hidden forever, and Lyra was calculating the optimal moment to break free from the system's gravity and initiate the jump to light speed. The tension in the ship's command center was palpable. They had maybe 2 hours before the Council's investigative fleet entered the system. The journey from the research station back to Lyra's ship had taken longer than expected, because some of the human evacuees had required medical assistance, and the transformation process had accelerated in some individuals, causing disorientation and temporary loss of physical coordination. Marina stood at the viewport and watched the stars. She thought about what she was leaving behind. She would never see the elven homeworld again. She would never sit in the great libraries of her people and study the ancient texts. She would never participate in the Council's deliberations or work toward the promotion that she had once believed was so important. All of that felt so small now, so trivial compared to what she had discovered and what she was helping to protect. Copper approached and stood beside her, his massive form creating a comforting weight at her side. The dragon seemed to sense her moment of uncertainty and was there to reassure her without words. Jade emerged from the cargo hold and made a small chirping sound, as if to remind Marina that she was not alone in this choice. She had her dragons. She had Claire and the other transformed humans. She had Lyra and the network of infected elves scattered across the galaxy. She had a family that was not defined by species or bloodline, but by shared purpose and understanding. Lyra's voice came through the communication system. All personnel were on board. All systems were green. It was time to leave. Marina felt the subtle vibration as the ship began to accelerate. They were still cloaked, still silent in the sensor's eyes. The ship climbed out of Zephyr 7's gravity well with deliberate slowness, trying not to create any energy signatures that might attract attention. Then the moment came. The Council's investigative fleet jumped into the system, 3 large cruisers and 2 support vessels. The standard configuration for a full environmental investigation. Their sensors swept the system, searching for anything unusual. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Marina held her breath. The Council fleet did not detect them. They scanned the empty colony. They detected the research station and began their approach to investigate. They found the uninfected humans who had refused to leave, the ones who had demanded to remain behind. But they found no evidence of contamination. They found no sign of the transformed colonists. They found no trace of Lyra's ship. The cloaking technology was that good. As the Council fleet became focused on the research station and the uninfected humans there, Lyra initiated the jump sequence. The ship's engines hummed with power, building toward the moment of translation into subspace. Marina felt the familiar sensation of reality bending around the ship, space folding in on itself to create a path between distant stars. They had made it. Against all odds, they had successfully extracted everyone who wanted to leave and had escaped without alerting the Council's attention. The jump completed, and they were gone. The system of Zephyr 7 vanished behind them, lost in the vast distances of space. Ahead of them lay months of travel and then arrival at the hidden community, where infected beings from dozens of species lived in harmony, building a civilization based on choice and understanding, rather than fear and hierarchy. Marina made her way through the ship, toward the observation lounge where Claire and some of the other transformed humans were gathered. As she walked, she passed mirrors and saw her own reflection. She looked different somehow, though nothing about her physical appearance had changed. Her eyes seemed clearer. Her posture seemed more confident. Her entire being seemed to radiate a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. In the observation lounge, Claire turned and smiled when she saw Marina. The infected human woman gestured for Marina to join them at the viewport. Outside, the strange geometry of subspace unfolded in colors and patterns that hurt to look at directly, but were beautiful in a way that transcended normal description. "Thank you," Claire said simply, "for believing in us, for choosing to help when you could have simply reported what you found and let the Council handle it." Marina considered the words. In the old days, following protocol would have been the right choice in her mind. But she had learned something fundamental during her journey. Sometimes the protocol was wrong. Sometimes the hierarchy was built on lies and fear. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was follow your heart instead of your orders. I did not do this for gratitude, Marina said. I did this because it was the right thing to do. And because my dragons chose me to be part of this. Because you deserve the choice. Because the humans of Zephyr 7 deserved the choice. Jade suddenly leaped up and placed her small head on Marina's lap, and Copper released a satisfied rumble that resonated through the entire lounge. The dragon seemed to approve of her answer. The journey to the far side of the galactic core would take months. During that time, Marina would learn more than she had learned in all her years as an emissary. She would study the history of the infected elves and understand the true scope of what had been hidden from her people. She would work with Claire and the other scientists to ensure that the humans of Zephyr 7 adjusted well to their transformation into their new community, and she would begin to consider the greatest question of all. What would happen when the Elven Council finally caught up with them, when they discovered that an emissary had not only failed in her duty, but had actively conspired against them? When they learned that the future they had tried to prevent was already unfolding in the dark corners of the galaxy? But those were questions for the future. For now, Marina stood in the observation lounge with her dragons at her side and her new family around her, watching the impossible beauty of subspace unfold before her. She had crossed the line. She had chosen her path. And though she did not know what would come next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never go back. The elf woman who had left the Elven Council as an emissary would never return. But something new would eventually reach back across the galaxy and challenge everything the Council believed about themselves and their place in the universe. Something new, something evolved, something that the ancient infected elves had been working toward for thousands of years. The future had begun,